Hello, everybody.
She said, "Hi."
I'd love to welcome you to the neuroscience of mental health and how we use that to combat stigma. And it's wonderful to see such a full room today. And this briefing is sponsored by a number of organizations who are listed here. I am Mark Resnick. I'm the chair emeritus of the American Brain Coalition. And what I'd like to start with, this is a Congressional Neuroscience briefing, Congressional Neuroscience Caucus briefing, and we have Congressman Thompson, who was one of the co-chairs of the caucus, here to speak. Congressman Thompson is from California 4, the winemaking area.
Mark, thank you very, very much, and thank you all for being here. I just can't tell you how important your participation is. You know, my staff, when I was walking out the door, they handed me a little card that had some great statistics. I want to focus on one, and that is they tell me that 1 in 5 people are affected by mental illness. I think that's wrong. I think everybody is affected because of mental illness. It touches all of us. You know, the old certain amount of degrees of separation. There are no degrees of separation when it comes to mental illness. It's us, it's our family, it's our friends, it's our neighbors, it's our coworkers. It affects all of us. It is expensive for all of us. It is incredibly unkind to all of us. And there's a lot of work that we need to do. I'm the co-chair for one reason, and that's because Earl Blumenauer, who was the founder of this caucus and the co-chair, when he left, he said, "I want you to take my place. I won't for a moment try and convince you that I can take his place, but I am proud to be asked by him to take over, because I think that mental illness, mental health is one of the top issues facing us as a people today. And it's every place. You agree. And it affects us in every way possible. My favorite example is when people talk about homelessness. And oftentimes critics will say, why are we throwing money at this problem? It's a mental health, or it's at drugs and alcohol. They're either addicted to drugs or they're addicted to alcohol. All of you know what happens if you have a mental illness and you can't get treatment. You self-treat, you self-medicate, and sometimes that's becomes an addiction to alcohol, sometimes it becomes an addiction to drugs, sometimes it becomes an addiction to both. So all of the excuses and all the fingers pointed are really misplaced issues. We have an issue that there's no way in the world that we can afford to continue to deal with the mental health problems that we face the way we do it. We treat symptoms. Bottom line, that's how government at every level deals with mental health issues. We treat symptoms. There's not enough money to do that. If we cashed out everything, we wouldn't be able to do it, and it doesn't get us to where we need to be. So a lot of you know, because I understand that every organization up there is supporting or has signed on to support legislation that I have that focuses on getting ahead of the curve. My Mental Health Accelerator Act, which would provide tax credits for public-private partnerships to do brain research. If we don't get ahead of the curve, figure out what causes this stuff, we're just going to continue to spend money that we don't have enough of treating symptoms. So I'm just here to say thank you, to remind you how important this is. And the reality is, if you came all the way to D.C., especially in this weather, you probably don't need to be reminded of how important this is. So just much gratitude, much appreciation, and know that I'm a phone call away. If there's anything I can do, I will help. And let's get some legislation passed. We've got a tax extender bill coming up, I think, before too long, and that accelerator bill should be part of that. We need to, and it's bipartisan. I talked to Mike Kelly about it today. So anything you can do to generate support, nudge Kelly to push his leadership, I think it's something that will really help. So thanks again very much for being here. And Mark, thank you for all that you do.
So it's not often that we also get a bonus today. We have another member of the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus who is in attendance, my favorite Congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky. And Jan will say a couple of words, and then we will have Andy. Jan.
I'm Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and Mark and I have been longtime friends and co-conspirators, and I am so happy to be here. That's really all I want to say, is because this is so very, very important. And the suffering that we know that some people, many people are feeling, maybe more, maybe, and I can get some confirmation, maybe many more people than usual are really suffering right now. And so we're going to learn some important lessons, and I am so glad to be here with a best friend of mine. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now we get to the actual briefing part. Andy Dunn has written a book called Burn Rate. Andy, well, he'll tell you about his own mental health crises, but Andy is the founder of Bonobos and two other companies, Maureen and Andy, and Monica and Andy, and another one. And Pie, okay. It's written down here, but I'm, you know, we can change our name to Maureen. Okay. At any rate, it's really, he's written a very compelling book about his battle with bipolar disorder, starting when he was undergraduate, and then trying to combat that while he was developing companies on a very serious scale. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how he did it.
So I'll start by saying I feel like the luckiest man alive. I always want to say that because Lou Gehrig said it. When I was 37, 10 years ago, my then untreated, unmedicated bipolar disorder came back with a vengeance. The acute mania, which is a messianic psychosis that led to me finally dealing with my buried diagnosis, came back for the first time since I was that undergraduate 20 at Northwestern. As a college student, that bipolar diagnosis was all too difficult to discuss, and it was too much to have dismissed. It was January of 2000, and I had literally been partying like it was 1999, because it was. Alcohol, pot, psychedelic mushrooms, and a powerful acne medication at the time that was thought to correspond to mental health issues. All of those things conspired to create a narrative that the issue that I faced was substance use related and not mental health. Of course, both things can be true. It was the turn of the millennium, as I mentioned. In my decompensating state, we think I didn't sleep for 100 hours, which would be a challenge for anyone's mind. If you have an underlying mood disorder, it's obviously a recipe for disaster. And I briefly saw a TV program of a bunch of folks praying for the return of the Messiah. In that decompensating state, I had an awesome realization, which is it was me. Jesus 2.0 was here. Everyone was worried about Y2K. I had bigger fish to fry to save the world. And by the way, if you haven't been the Messiah before, I've got to tell you, it's amazing. Just imagine genuinely believing that you're going to save the world. It is thrilling, it's intoxicating. Giving sermons at Burger King on Orrington, riding the L, trying to teach people, about the good news, knocking on doors in the middle of the night, getting doors slammed in my face, thinking I just had to try a little bit harder. And of course, this delusion, this psychosis that's so wonderful and intoxicating for you is an absolute nightmare for everyone else. My friends called my parents, who intervened. My dad came and picked me up, Pontiac Grand Am. And on the way back from Evanston to Downers Grove, where I grew up, I lectured him about, there we go, thanks, Jen, here we go. I lectured him on everything he had done wrong in his life. And these are characteristics of what is called a mixed manic episode. You have anger, irritability, sadness at the state of the world, and of course this joy and euphoria that you're gonna fix it. So after my mom and dad and sister conspired to get me to the emergency room, to the hospital where my mom worked, where I had volunteered, where I worked, I was able to get better. A week of sleep, a week of medication, and we had a game plan, which is this was something that I needed to deal with. I came home, I opened up the World Book Encyclopedia, because this was pre-Google, definitely pre-ChatGPT, and I learned that the suicide attempt rate for bipolar 1 is 60%, and the suicide rate for bipolar is 20%. Now, I was a math team nerd growing up, and I believe in data, and it's a tough thing as a 20-year-old who was totally good the previous week to be like, empirically, the most likely way I would die is by suicide. I also understood that this mania, this messianic delusion that was so humiliating in retrospect, could come back at any point in time. And so I felt like I had this bomb in my brain. And, you know, the previous week I was a college kid having a good time. So you can imagine that this type of diagnosis is hard to accept. And I did what a lot of people, young people do, because bipolar is usually diagnosed between 18 and 25. I buried it. And I grew up with an amazingly diverse background. My mom is a Punjabi Indian immigrant. My dad is a Scandinavian, Irish, Swedish, Midwesterner, and very different cultures with one thing in common. Don't talk about mental health, right? So what happened was sort of like Fight Club. We all knew it happened, but we didn't talk about it. And so I did things that were not wise. I didn't deal with what had happened. I didn't take medication, and I led the train of denial saying, this didn't happen, I'm fine, it must have been the drugs. And then over the course of the next period of time, I started to once in a while think about this word bipolar. And there's a thing that we say, which is not Andy, we say Andy is bipolar. We don't say Andy has bipolar. We would never say someone is heart disease. We would say they have heart disease. And so this additional issue of conflating your identity with your illness makes an already difficult thing to deal with even more difficult. Not only do I have a disorder, I now am one. And so I imputed this diagnosis as an unspeakable shame. Because what is shame, but what isn't, what is shame, but what is unspeakable? The worst thing happened on the way out the door at the hospital. The diagnosing psychiatrist said, this is a differential diagnosis, and if Andy doesn't have a recurrence over the course of the next 5 years, it could be that this was a one-off psychotic break. We clung, and I clung to that comment like a life raft, hoping that 5 years would pass. And then 8 years did. I spent 5 years working in corporate America. I then went off to Stanford Business School, and I was largely asymptomatic, other than self-medicating with a lot of alcohol. And then I did what a lot of people with bipolar type 1 do. I started a company. And it's sort of a joke, but it's true. According to the UCSF, 2 to 3% of American adults may deal with some form of bipolar. 11% of entrepreneurs may deal with some form of bipolar. ADHD, unipolar depression, substance use, suicide, high-functioning autism, all of these things over-index in entrepreneurs. All you need to do is turn on the news. And unfortunately, the highs and lows of the startup journey mirror a mood disorder. You ride the roller coaster. And so in that way, my illness was almost cloaked by the job. It was a way to explain away the symptoms as this is your job. And I had really challenging times, co-founder divorce, always often being like 6 or 10 weeks from running out of cash. And in my mind, I kind of knew there was this thing that had happened to me, but I said, this must be my job. And then on the precipice of selling the company, 9 years in, we'd raised over 100 million of venture capital. We had hundreds of millions of revenue that we had done, over 500 employees, 50 stores. That mania came back. I flew into a psychotic spiral for the second time in my life. I was hospitalized for a week in Bellevue in New York City. And this time I was 36, the stakes were high, I had a girlfriend I adored who I didn't want to lose, and a family that was very clear-eyed, okay, this is what I've been dealing with the whole time. And so I walked out ready. I walked out in the right state of mind. I'm going to take my medication, I'm going to see a doctor. I was so eager to reunite with my family, and I was met by 4 NYPD officers who took me down to the 6th precinct across from my favorite Italian restaurant, L'Artusi. I had never noticed the precinct before, and I was booked and charged with felony and misdemeanor assault. That's a cliffhanger for my book, because I wanted you to buy some copies. That's what I'm here for, but I actually brought some copies. And I remember this fun exchange with my arresting officer. I said, hey, are these mugshots going to be on the internet? And he turned around, a guy from Staten Island, and he goes, dude, you're not the founder of Google. I Googled you. The catatonic depression that followed that manic episode was horrific. 6 months of suicidal ideation, not able to get better, and it was the hardest time in my life. At the end of that 6 months, everything went right. I found medications that work for me, and I haven't missed a pill in a decade. I found a great psychiatrist who's also a psychotherapist, which is a bit of a unicorn. We've met 800 times in the last decade. I was able to hire a great lawyer to deal with this intersectionality of criminal justice and mental health that so often doesn't go well for people, particularly people of color. And I built a real regimen of fitness, sleep, nutrition, stopped drinking, and I just got better. Just as importantly, my family rallied around. I rebuilt my life on the steel spine of Manuela Zonenstein, who was my then girlfriend and now my wife. My entire family was clear-eyed, and my mom moved in with me for 2 weeks at a hotel. Everyone was clear that this was what I had been dealing with. My sister Monica, my dad Charlie, the same. And in the process of writing this memoir, Burn Rate, we got to do something cool, which is we got to excavate these family skeletons. We got to deal with them. We got to get on a path of healing and integration, and we became the kind of family that could actually share what's usually swept under the rug with the world. And the work continues. I had bipolar in my rearview mirror. I thought it was good mental health-wise, and then during COVID, like many of us, I experienced a social isolation and loneliness that I hadn't known. I moved with my wife and our young newborn son to Chicago. Family were there, but I had no friends and community. That led to the creation of my new startup, Pi, which stands for People I Enjoy. It's an agentic AI and mobile application that seeks to help anyone find friendship, love, community, and belonging wherever they live. It's not going that well yet, but we're working hard. I know how this goes, and I've got a lot more medication now. But we do have over 250,000 people on our product in both Austin and Chicago, and we're having so much fun. I want everyone to have the good fortune that I had, the access to care, the ability to afford it, a great doctor, meds that work, colleagues who accept it, a family that supports it, and the most important thing in the world, an amazing mom. And so it's now that I'd like to acknowledge Usha Huja-Dunn, who's been on this ride with me. Mom, thanks for all you've done. You are my hero. Somebody get this video of her crying. It usually only happens after Caleb Williams led comebacks. We can do better in America on mental health. It is a profit center, not a cost center, if we take care of our people. It is something where society can thrive if we figure out how to unlock the magic of neurodivergence, but contain its costs. I'm confident that we will, partly because of conversations like this one. Thank you so much.
Wow. I am so glad that you agreed to come and speak to us, Andy. It was really moving, and just, well, I'm speechless other than that, but thank you. And I'm not usually speechless.
You're talking again now, Mark. So you're good.
So now we're going to do the panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to do questions and answers. We don't have anything scripted, but each of the panelists is going to introduce themselves, tell you why they're here, and what it is that motivates them in terms of decoding stigma and the neuroscience of mental health. So we're going to start to my right, although he's not really to my right, with Mark Rappaport, who I'm glad to call a friend.
Good day. I'm Mark Rappaport. I'm the president-elect of the American Psychiatric Association. I'm also the chair of the board of a group called Stop Stigma Together that grew out of an initiative we launched at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute at the University of Utah, where I was the founding CEO and chair of the Department of Psychiatry there. Why am I here? I'm here because, as was said by everyone else, all of us have experienced the stigma associated with mental health. When I got into medical school, the only person I could tell, my dad was in Europe at an international meeting, my siblings were gone, my girlfriend at the time was at school until 10 at night. So I waited until visiting hours, and I went to the hospital and I told my mom. She was getting ECT at the time. I was the only person in the family I could tell. Now, when I told that story when I was applying to residency programs, any place I told it shut me down. And so for years, until I was speaking at the Carter Mental Health Initiative, I never told that story. That's stigma.
I just go down the line? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Andrea Beckel-Mitchener. I am currently the acting director for the National Institute of Mental Health at the NIH. I'm here because one of the things we do, of course, we support the research that underlies a lot of the treatments and cures and interventions that we hope to see, both for this generation and moving into the future. I'm a crier, so I'm looking at Andy's mom right now. So if I break down, you know why. So one of the things we research about is our barriers to care. Care can be, there's one model that says affordability, accessibility, and acceptability. Affordability is clearly, we need to have people be able to get the treatments, to access those treatments. Accessibility, do we have enough care providers? Where stigma comes in is really acceptability. Are the treatments and cures and therapies that are out there acceptable to the individuals that have these conditions, to the families, and to the communities that are also supporting the individuals? So again, we think that research has a really important role, and that's why I'm here today.
Hi, I am Erica Moore. I am the Director of Operations with the STAR Coalition, where STAR stands for Stakeholders in Treatment, Advocacy, Research, and Recovery. It is a nonprofit that's, for the last 10 years, have been dedicated to trying to strengthen the trust in mental health research. So I am here for a slightly nuanced situation here, that there is stigma of mental illnesses, but then there's another layer of stigma for mental health research. And we all know that without the research, there is no hope for any kind of recovery, long-term recovery, right, for a lot of illnesses. So I am here basically because I am supporting mental health research, and we do that through connecting people in the community with different research sites, and just trying to spread awareness. One of the things that we have going on this month is our Fueling the Future February program, and I left cards out on the table out there, but it is a month-long, a month of action that people can take, little steps that you can take to support research in various forms, whether it's through policy or whether it's just through, contacting a local person or sharing your story on social media. But every time somebody like Andy shares his story, it takes a bite out of stigma. And my very good friend Cecilia McGall is here from Students with Psychosis, and she's been doing amazing work doing just that. And so I thank you all for coming here, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Winton, and I am here representing the 46 million people who live in small-town America. 4 years ago, we launched a new nonprofit organization called Rural Minds, which is a result of my 28-year-old nephew's suicide. My nephew Brooks was a farmer. He was the father of 3-year-old twins when he died, and on the surface appeared to be the happiest person on the face of the planet. And we learned very quickly that he had been suffering in silence and was too embarrassed and too ashamed, because he lived in this small town where everybody knew my family, to seek the help. And I have had the privilege of working in the biopharmaceutical industry for pretty much most of my career. So I thought I knew something about mental health until it became personal, until I lost my nephew, who I miss each and every day. So I am here to ensure that the people that are working day and night to provide our food and fiber and all the other occupations that are found in rural America are not forgotten, and that they too have a place at the table.
Hi.
You want to go again?
I just want to say, may your nephew's memory be a blessing. Thanks for sharing that.
We're going to start with some questions, and the first one is for Dr. Rappaport. And
That's why I sit next to you.
through your both your APA lens and Stop Stigma together, I'd like you to explain the nature of stigma and the many forms that it takes.
Thank you, Mark. You know, the National Academies back in about 2017 came out with a wonderful report on stigma. And they talked about 3 different types of stigma. Self-stigma, and Andy, you were talking some about that earlier. The thought of, oh, I'm defective. The thought that, oh, if I only prayed more, if I were only a better person, I would be okay. And that keeps people from getting care. Social stigma. We've heard a lot about social stigma. That's when someone may have a mental illness or may have a physical illness. And you know this. You see this. If a child has cancer, the entire community rallies around that family, brings food. But if a child is depressed and hospitalized, that family is shunned and ignored. And then institutional stigma. What do I mean by that? Well, in about 23 states in the United States, if you want a medical license, they're going to ask you, hey, have you ever seen a psychiatrist? And if you answer yes, then there's a whole series of follow-up examinations and questions you have. If you have cancer, you're not being asked, oh, you have cancer, you can't get a medical license. If you have heart disease. So these 3 forms of stigma really pervade in our society, and unfortunately, with the most recent general survey, GSS survey, we haven't changed. In fact, we've gotten a little worse since 2018 in terms of perception by the general community of stigma.
Okay, Dr. Beckel-Michener, so tell me about what is the NIMH doing through neuroscience to both identify, address, and combat stigma?
So stigma is part of our research portfolio, but the majority of our research does go into understanding the brain, mechanisms of brain, and behavior, how brain function underlies behavior. So that includes things like neurochemistry, things that drugs will help correct or rebalance. And the main thing that we do is we try to do research that gives options to patients. So the research we support, and sometimes it would be, I'm going to use bipolar as an example, that people have to take medication for that or they benefit from the medication. That's the research that we would support. How they take the medication, what is, again, I go back to what is acceptable to the patient. What are the options that the patient needs? All of our research contributes to helping individuals, helping families understand what their options are. And that will go all the way up into what we call services and interventions. So stepping away from bipolar, there are a number of mental health conditions where some people do want to take a pill, and that's more acceptable to them, or they do want to see a psychiatrist, or they want to see a psychologist, or they want to work through it on their own. We don't recommend that, by the way. But there's a number of ways that the research contributes to the overall health. The bottom line for us, Mark, is that we feel mental health is health. Understanding how you can be well, how you can move on a journey to wellness is not just about your physical being, it is about your mental health. And let me just add one more thing, is that we really see a generational change here, which I think is hopeful, that the younger generation is more open about the conversations around mental health. We think that is a really important step. They're engaging in the research. They are moving into understanding why taking care of their mental health, taking care of their friends, their family, which we're not seeing in the older generation. I think there's a real difference there, and it's a hopeful difference in that as we continue this conversation, I think we'll see more and more breakthroughs that will help people.
Thank you. You know, I just wanted to interject that several years ago, a former member of Congress was trying to institute an assistant secretary for mental health. And we at the American Brain Coalition opposed it because we're saying, well, then you're saying mental health is not health. Ms. Moore. Okay, so let's see. From your work at the STAR Coalition, what are the most effective ways you've seen to communicate that communities reduce stigma? And you represent a coalition of mental health advocates with a focus on the private sector. So what obstacles are created by stigma, and how can this be addressed by public-private cooperation?
First of all, I want to say, I feel like my questions were the hardest of So first of all, as I said, we work with a lot of the pharmaceutical research. So when we say public-private, there's government-funded and public-funded research, and then there's privately funded and pharmaceutical research. I work with pharmaceutical research companies, and that, of course, is a whole nother layer of stigma. But so we've found that working with the clinical research sites, the best way to help sort of alleviate the stigma within the communities is with each site that we work with, we will go out, we will establish a 30-mile radius around that site, and we will meet with all of the different organizations that are within that radius. We'll meet with the soup kitchens, the shelters, the clubhouses, if there's NAMI groups, if there's DBSA groups, advocacy groups, but we meet with all those organizations and we try and connect them to the site because we want to build these relationships. Because as the sites become part of this ecosystem, you have people that are already battling their mental illnesses, and they already have that, but they don't know of all of their options. And that's where we come in. We want them to know about all of their options. I don't support any specific drug or specific pharma company, but I do support access, and access to all treatment forms and all care forms, I think, is very important. So that's how we battle stigma. And I think, Dr. Resnick, about the question about how public and private intersect, without public confidence, without the public supporting mental health and the policies behind it, and the NIMH, they're prioritizing it, right? So without the public supporting this and letting the public, letting everyone know that it's being prioritized, the pharma companies who are have to answer to stakeholders. They have to answer to their shareholders, sometimes investors. If the investors don't feel confident that you can create, that these drugs are going to be prioritized in the country, they're not going to be as willing to invest the money. And it takes a lot of money to get these drugs from the lab to the patients that really need them. So I think that's where the public comes in supporting what's happening down the road.
One of the things I always like to say as a basic neuroscientist is that it's our job to find the targets, and it's pharma's job to make the drugs to address them. And without that public-private partnership, patients are sunk.
And it's a huge, huge investment. So appreciate both ends of it. Appreciate both ends of it.
Okay, so Mr. Wynn, you bring a unique and important perspective as you're the only organization representing rural America. So can you speak to the unique challenges that rural America faces, both due to stigma and the lack of availability of professionals to address psychiatric illness?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. First, I'd like to level set for those of you who may not be aware of the runaway crisis we have in rural America right now. We had an issue even before, but the last 15 months, due to decisions being made down the hallway here, people in rural America are in very bad shape, and we have a very dire situation on our hands. People in rural America, like my family, and besides working in the biopharmaceutical industry, I also live and work on a dairy farm. I'm from a long line of dairy farmers, so I see this each and every day. But people like my family that make their living farming are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than any other occupation. Young people that grow up in rural America are 74% more likely to die by suicide than young people that grow up in urban areas. On and on these statistics go. And if you want to learn more about what we're facing right now with our organization, please go to ruralminds.org. As I mentioned, we're the only national nonprofit organization exclusively focused on this crisis we're facing in rural America. Part of what we're dealing with right now is the stigma. Mental illness is stigmatized in many different parts of our society. But in small towns, like where I grew up and where I live again, a town of 500 people, everybody knows everything about you. And so even if we did have mental health hospitals or clinics in our area, which we don't, no one would want to see their pickup truck parked outside because the news would spread like wildfire through that small town that Farmer Jones was having some type of a mental issue. We are facing right now a crisis in the farming community, especially with the trade wars. The tariffs have done irreparable damage to agriculture and farming. We hear a lot about immigration, and immigration especially in cities like what's going on in Minneapolis. What people don't realize is that agriculture relies on foreign guest workers. 75% of workers who work in agriculture are born outside of the United States. Within the last 4 months, we've lost 155,000 farm workers. And you can imagine the pressure that's putting now on those of us who own and operate farms and provide the food that you'll probably have for dinner tonight and the fiber in the clothing you're wearing on a cold day like today. There are many other things that we face in rural America, such as shortage of facilities. As you know, a decision was made recently that will close countless rural hospitals, including every single hospital in the county I live in upstate New York, will be closed when this is all said and done. We will then be driving to either Pennsylvania or Ohio to get health care. And where we live on the shores of Lake Erie, where we have 4 feet of snow right now, getting anywhere this time of year can be very troubling. We have no mass transportation. We can't take an Uber. We can't take a bus. We can't take a subway. We have a shortage of health care as it is. When I moved back to the farm 4 years ago, when we started our nonprofit organization, I couldn't even find a primary care physician that was taking new patients in our rural area. Finally, 8 months later, I got into a primary care physician. So if we have an issue with primary care physicians, you can only imagine what we face with mental health providers. 65% of the rural counties, for example, in rural America have no psychiatrists. And this is why many of us, including myself, I'm also a survivor of a traumatic brain injury. I drive 3 hours each way to the Cleveland Clinic to get the care that I need because I have no other facilities anywhere nearby. So I've got lots more to say, but I will stop right there.
Well, and we have lots more time in which you can say it. So here's what we're going to do. We have a few questions that the panel is going to bounce among themselves, and then we're going to reserve about 15 minutes for questions from those of you who are here. And I'd really like to prioritize, to start with, staff members. Okay, if you have something to say. All right? So, the first question. How does science, and I think, Mark, you probably want to start this off. Now, we're not going to use the doctor stuff anymore because we're on the Hill, and as we all know, on the Hill, you only use first names. How does science conquer stigma and self-stigma? And what new tools do we need to address this? And how does increased understanding of brain circuitry and the cell biology of psychiatric disorder help to overweigh stigma and challenge outdated beliefs?
You know, thanks for the softball. You know, I think there are a number of things to start with. One is, you know, believe it or not, the mind and the body, they're connected. That's why God made the neck. The reality is that one of the wonderful things that's happened over the last couple of decades is that with the advent of new techniques, everything from advances in molecular biology to advances in imaging to our understanding of the body. And we now can definitely demonstrate the interactions between the brain and the rest of the body. What had happened is this most beautiful organ system in the body, the brain, the one that allows you to learn and to laugh and to live and to love and remember. That was stigmatized. Somehow that was less real than the heart or the lungs or the kidneys. But now with science, we're able to show you the circuits. You know, we talked a little bit about this a minute ago when we were talking about, Andy was telling his story and he was talking about, oh gosh, well maybe it's substance use disorder. Substance use disorders are disorders of the brain. They're just, and the circuitry involved in substance use disorders is similar to the reward circuitry that's involved in us getting pleasure seeing our kids. This begins to break down stigma. When we begin to have people understand that there are physical measures that we can demonstrate, whether they're blood-borne biomarkers, whether they are imaging findings, that remind us that this beautiful, beautiful organ is part of the larger organ of our body and doesn't exist. The body doesn't exist without it. And that bidirectional interaction and how much we've learned about that is so important. Just out of curiosity, has anyone in this room over the last year or two had like a cold or COVID? Yeah? Raise your hand if you have. Didn't you feel awesome? Wasn't that the best you ever felt? You know, you had lots of energy, you could think clearly, you had lots of great ideas, you slept well, you ate well? No? Oh, so maybe that infection was getting to your brain. Maybe it was causing these changes. We need to break down that dichotomy. There's only one of us, and that's who we are. All right, I'll hand it
Okay,
to you.
I'm gonna just add on a little bit there. So one of the things that we recognize now for a number of years is that many mental health conditions emerge in childhood, adolescence, young adulthood. And there are precursors, there are signs. I see my colleague, Anne, in the audience. So brain development is so critical. We have to understand how the brain develops and what the influences are, both environmental and genetic. And that will help us understand how these conditions emerge. And I think that's a really critical piece for the biology, and it's something that NIMH and other institutes at the NIH invest heavily in, so that we start to build this picture of what does wellness look like. And then when something goes astray, what are we actually looking for? What are the signs? Are there biomarkers? So I want to add that comment on to the biology piece. And I also, if I may, Mark, just tack on to Jeff's comment about rural America. Congress recognized a number of years ago the importance of this, and they actually established the Office of Rural Mental Health Research at NIMH. That office still exists, and we have a director of that office, and it's recognition that these communities are unique in many ways, and they're all different in many ways. That you see one rural community, you see one rural community. But I think that addressing those, the needs of those communities and recognizing their individuality is something that's really critical to the research, as well as other communities. We heard a little bit about cultural barriers to seeking care, other things. There are other populations like veterans and the active military that also express a lot of, there's a lot of stigma involved in those communities. So, and they all overlap. These all intersect in some way. So I think the research tries to address the needs of these individual communities and be able to help them understand how they can get better. And it may be unique to the individual, it may be unique to the community.
Can I jump in on that?
Of course you may.
I just thank you. I just back to how biology is impacting stigma. We work with one of the sites that we work with, a clinical research site. They set up an information table at a local farmers. It's not a farmers market, but it's like a farmers market. So they set up this information table, and they just sit there every Saturday. They're there in the community, and people can go by, and they just have information on different indications, different illnesses, and people can see that they're there. When people talk to them, and it takes it from it's a biological mechanism. It's an actual physical mechanism. It's not somebody's choice to be laying in their bed. They're not lazy. They're not being, it's not I hate to say a behavioral issue, it's behavioral, but it's not like a choice. And so when the families that do have a lot of stigma and that are embarrassed and feel, bad about this, when they learn, hey, this is a physical thing. This is just like diabetes or a heart disease. This is an actual biological thing that we can add another biological thing to and hopefully even it out, as Andrew was saying. So I think that goes to stigma too, when people recognize that it is a physical illness and not just being lazy or being mean or whatever, that does take away the stigma as well. So that's what I wanted to add.
Andy?
I don't know that much about this.
Okay.
I do feel like it's weird that we neglect the brain, given its role in the body. And I have seen the differential budgets between what gets invested, let's say, with different associations, what we put into the heart, right? What we put into these other organs. So I'm excited that we're having this discussion.
Not that that's not important.
Yeah. I'll say one thing, which is in my time in corporate America, which I guess is the unique perspective. When I sit with CHROs and CEOs, when I was on the book tour, the case that I tried to make is don't do this because it's the right thing to do it because you're greedy, right? Because if we have better performance from people, we have higher productivity, and mental health correlates to that. So we got to figure out how to pitch this as a return on investment. Mm-hmm. This is the corporate side of it. And I have to say I was astonished by Walmart acquired Bonobos, and during the acquisition process, I had to share, hey, you're going to find a felony arrest on my record potentially. And the person who was the HR lead got very pale. And she said, that's okay, we'll talk to Doug about it, Doug McMillan, the outgoing CEO. And I had a couple weeks on pins and needles thinking, is this going to fall through? And then they came back and they said, hey, we just need to see your medical records. We don't need to see them. We'll send them to an outside psychiatrist. And I thought, is this going to forgive me, Jeff, be some, podunk psychiatrist in Northwest Arkansas. That was the thought that I had authentically.
You think there's one there?
And no, there's not one there. They're 100 miles away. And my Manhattan-based psychiatrist goes, oh, it's going to the former head of psychiatry for the FBI. And then they approved the deal, which was so healing for me. They said, hey, we understand you're taking care of yourself. We understand you're taking your medication. We're so happy to proceed. And I thought, gosh, how lucky I am that I'm getting corporate acceptance from this in the context of a transaction. So I do feel like corporate America is doing some good things on this journey.
Well, in fact, I want to talk about corporate America now, but I just wanted to add one thing. I am, although nothing I say has anything to do with the VA, I do have an appointment with the VA. And one of the slides I had, and my work is on blood biomarkers for depression, and one of the slides is of a man pulling at his hair, much longer than mine, saying, you mean it's not just in my head, it's in my blood. And I think that really is what Mark was talking about in a distilled way. But corporate America, and what I wanted to talk about with corporate America specifically is insurance companies and parity. When I was on the Hill in 2000, I worked on parity for mental health, which didn't become law until, I guess, 5 or 6 years later, and is still not in fact. So I wanted to hear from you how the lack of parity for people with mental health is influenced by stigma and influences stigma.
I'll start that one because it's something very near and dear to my heart, because my brother, who also lives with bipolar disorder, just lost his insurance because of some decisions that have been made. People in rural America, by and large, in many cases, are uninsured or underinsured for even physical illnesses. So you can imagine how difficult it is getting coverage for mental health, and hence the issue my brother just ran into last week. So, people are needing to make decisions between paying for food or paying for their insurance. And so a lot of self-employed people, such as parts of my family who are farmers, dropped their insurance a few years ago, and so they're uninsured altogether, which is something that we deal with every day. Believe it or not, I would imagine everyone in this room is aware of the 988 number, right? So in many cases, 988 is the psychiatric help for people in rural America. And that's why no matter where I travel across this country and give talks, I make sure that people know that, because if they don't have insurance, if they don't have a mental health provider anywhere nearby, at least if they call or text 988, they're going to get a trained individual that can help them, not only in the time of crisis, but then help them get connected with resources if they can afford them the next day. So, it's only been in existence, 3.5 years now, I guess? Mm-hmm. And I think, part of it, when the funding was dropped for the LGBTQ community a few months ago, a lot of people got very confused that the entire 988 program was gone. And that's not the case, as most of you know. So 988 is what we rely on in many cases.
Which is better than the criminal justice system,
Well,
which is the other big provider, right, of mental health care.
oh yeah, the 3 largest mental health hospitals in the country are all prisons and jails. The Twin Towers Jail, Cook County Jail, Rikers Island. There's been a dramatic decrease in mental health beds. It's just been staggering, the loss of mental health beds that have occurred in the United States over the last 40 years. And then you pair that with the lack of parity. If you have a social worker and she's or he's in private practice, or they, whatever one is appropriate term, they can't make enough money to keep that office open if they take Medicare, Medicaid patients, or even most insurance, because the payment rates, be it for social work, be it for psychologists, be it for physicians, psychiatrists, is so low when you contrast that with payment rates for other types of medical specialties. And the amount of work that it takes for prior authorization of care, for justification of continued care is horrendous. The APA has been actively going out and actually suing different health systems and providers around and insurers around this, because they have lists of insurers, of potential providers. Many times those providers are no longer on that plan. And it is a real problem in terms of disparity. But part of that problem, again, is the stigma associated with it. The idea that, oh, it's only that that person isn't tough enough. Oh, if it's that person's fault, they should be in jail because they have a substance use disorder. You know, we've criminalized and marginalized folks with diseases of the most wonderful organ system in the body. But the other thing to say is there's a lot of good news going on. And I hope we're going to have a chance to discuss some of the positive things happening too.
Can I tell a quick story?
Please.
When I was in the catacombs in New York under the court, which is where I went straight from Bellevue to jail, I couldn't take my medication in. So my arresting officer said, hey, well, you should sneak your meds in. They're going to ask if you have anything on you, just say no. And I was like, okay. Like I've already been charged. Well, how worse can today get? How much worse can it get? And you can be down there for 48 to 72 hours before they release you. And so you're out of this situation that might be a mental health crisis and you can't get your medication. 100% of the guys in there other than me were black and brown folks. And when we went in front of the judge, I was the only one who had a lawyer because I had to figure out I had to remember my sister's number and call her and say, I think I might have an issue on the way out because the psychiatrist at Bellevue kind of tipped me off. And she figured it out, and so I was the only one that had a lawyer there. He cost $20,000. Then I had to hire a crisis PR firm for my company. That was $50,000. And my psychiatrist cost $1,100 for 45 minutes. And I saw him twice a week for about 5 years, and the reimbursement rate was 9%.
Yep.
So that's $100,000 a year out of pocket. And this guy's a Gucci of psychiatrists. Who can afford that? You know, it was just some good fortune that I could afford all that. And so we're on point here with how do we
On the
change that?
other hand, my son in LA was on Medi-Cal and said to me, you know, it's getting bad. My depression's coming back. I need help. He called Medi-Cal. They gave him 3 names of therapists. 2 never called back. And this was in December. And one said, well, I can see you in April. Yeah, that's unacceptable. Okay, so
The good
let's
news?
Good news.
let's talk about science, okay? And stigma's part of this because clearly, right now, there is a certain amount of stigma against science. But how are we going to convince people that one of the important ways to combat stigma is by increasing investment in research into the neuroscience that results in stigma?
You want me to take some of that?
Hey, you're NIMA. If you don't start, we're in trouble.
Well, there is good news here, obviously. The budget that just passed, NIH did very well with that, and we're extremely grateful. The research is future wellness for all of us, for all Americans. And we use the money, whatever budget is given to us, we try to use it to the best of our abilities to support really high quality research. I think, I can't really comment on stigma against scientists, but I would say I was reading very recently that 75% of Americans still believe in science and still believe scientists as, you know, and that's very encouraging to me. I don't think we'll ever get everybody on our side, but I do feel like that is a significant number of individuals who are supportive of science in general, supportive of the work that NIMH and other institutes at NIH do. that is what they believe in. So I feel like we hear a lot of bad things, but I also think there's something really encouraging about those numbers. And I see it with my own family and with my neighbors, that they are constantly asking, what is the latest research? What can we learn? And so I feel like we're on a good path.
Well, you know, I would like to add to that a little bit. Science is hope. Science is hope that we'll understand things, that we'll do things better, that we discover what's going on with people, that we have better treatments and better cures. That's one of the most important things. As a physician, as a clinician, as a researcher, one of the reasons why I spend hours writing grants that get rejected. Sometimes they get funded.
Andrea.
Sometimes they get funded, but you know, why do I do that? Because I'm hoping for something better for my patients. I'm hoping to be able to give someone a better approach to their care and to what their challenges are. But the other part of hope, which is really important, and this goes back to the Dark Ages. Yes, really the Dark Ages. I used to have dark hair. And Jeannie knows this. One of the wonderful things when I was out there doing a lot of work at that point in schizophrenia and looking at the interaction between the brain and the immune system was going to all of these community health centers. And we actually did the research at the community health centers. And the patients would come up to us and say, well, do you have another study for us to do? Do you have some more for us? Because it gives people a sense of value. It gives people a sense of purpose, a sense that many times these people have been ignored and marginalized. And the idea of being able to help others is really important and valuable. And research is not only hope for the investigator, but for our partners in research, because we can't do clinical research without patients. And that's an important message for them to hear and for us to respect them for their generosity.
Thank you.
Sure.
In our work, we use science a great deal because anyone, such as a farmer who is making a living off the land, has to understand the mechanics of how a crop is raised or how a calf is born and how they grow up to be something that will be a productive part of that operation. So farmers in particular in rural America instinctually are scientists. And so that's something over the last 4 years since we've been launched that we're really tapping into. I like to say often that we're kind of the intersection between science and faith, because science on a farm can only take you so far. And then you have to believe that something else or someone else is also in charge to make the rain fall and to make the snow melt and all the things that we rely on a working farm. But it's been very helpful to us, especially in connecting with the people that we represent, is really tapping into science.
I'll say one more thing on that too. So the other thing that was mentioned earlier, and I think we can reinforce here, is the involvement of the entire ecosystem. So the public funding that we receive at NIMH and some of the other institutes is really super important. That is the public's investment, obviously. But we do partner with industry. We do partner with biotech. I'm off to a meeting in Silicon Valley next Monday to discuss this exact topic in terms of how we can integrate what the public members of the community do and make sure that we are maximizing the effect we have, that the research will get done. It will be beneficial to all kinds of people and communities. And that, you know, there may be money to be made also out in the commercial sector, that they can take the discoveries and commercialize in ways that or extend and amplify the help that we can provide from the research side as well. So I think that building this together, public-private partnerships have been and remain really important going forward.
Okay. How many of you have heard of the term treatment-resistant depression? right? You've seen it. It's on MSNBC or MS Now all the time when they're advertising something for it. Well, here, what it is, in a simple sense. Well, thank you. Mark. That's why I need him. You're right. I like him too. Basically, after 3 or 4 series of treatments for depression, neither the patient doesn't expect to get better, and their doc doesn't expect them to get better. And so I think the term treatment resistant is a terrible word because it puts the onus on the patient and it's not their fault. The question is, and I think we'll start with you, Mark, is how much does clinician bias and what effect does clinician bias have on patient outcome, and where are there better evidence-based approaches to therapy? That was definitely not a softball.
I didn't think the other ones were either, just between us. You know, I think there are a couple of things to say. I'll start with a little story. Many years ago, I was talking with a dear friend of mine who was at the University of Pittsburgh, and I had a research associate that moved to Pittsburgh. And my dear friend Ellen Frank hired her. And she was in this study that Ellen was doing, looking at the longitudinal outcomes of individuals with bipolar disorder. And she said, well, you know, we had to move that person to different studies because she was so good and so empathetic and hopeful. All of her patients got well no matter what. And so one of the parts of this story is the importance of connection between the therapist and the patient. And that is so critical. Another part of this story is the importance, and I know I keep harping on it, of hope. If I have taken care of many people that have had depression that's been refractory to many, many different treatments. But one of the issues is, that person knowing that you're there for them. Another issue that is involved is them being understanding and getting a sense of control over their illness. So every patient I've ever worked with, I'd ask them, okay, what's the most troubling symptom for you and how bad is it, 1 to 10? And we would track it. And we could then, as partners, figure out if something was working or something wasn't working. But it engaged this person, gave this person control of what's going on with their medications, with their psychotherapy, with one of the illnesses that they have, the one that was dealing with their brain. But we have more and more good evidence-based treatments that work. We have more modalities of care that work than we've ever had before, whether we're looking at RTMS, repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, whether we're looking at some of the other treatments, the direct brain stimulation that's recently come out, whether we look at where we may be going with psychedelics that may enhance a psychotherapeutic healing process, whether we look at the array of medications that work on different series of neurotransmitter systems and impact different circuits within the brain. We're at a time of tremendous opportunity, tremendous growth in this field. And we are where the cancer was in the 90s. Mm-hmm. With the burgeoning of new technologies that have occurred, with the integration of big data and AI, we're at a point of tremendous hope. And I think it's important to know that.
I'm going to riff on that one too. And so my actual day job, I was introduced as the acting director for National Institute of Mental Health. My actual day job is as deputy director of the Brain Initiative, the NIH Brain Initiative. And some of the technologies that you've just mentioned are being developed in the Brain Initiative and with support. And ABC has co-led a number of briefings that have centered around the Brain Initiative. And I think some of the individual stories, like Andy's here, have been amazing, seeing how some of these new technologies are really impacting lives now. Things that we wouldn't have dreamed of. They were science fiction, 5 years ago even, and now they're actually in patients, in testing, and I think that it's just a whole new world. So if this whole congressional thing doesn't work out for you, become a neuroscientist because it is super cool. The science is amazing, and I think just keep your eyes wide open about all of the treatments and cures that are coming down the pike.
And it's not just the mechanical stuff. It's not just it's also new mechanisms in the drug interactions that there's some amazing new mechanisms that are at play that are changing the game for treatments.
Yeah, and I want to say, so the work I do is never going to be funded by the Brain Initiative because it's not tool making. But those tools are so important to all of us who study the brain. And the ramifications of those discoveries we're just beginning are just beginning to emerge. So it really is important. You know, what do you think about this? Right? Okay. It's a shame we have to end it, although I think most of us are going to stick around for a little while. And on behalf of the American Brain Coalition, I'd like to thank each of our speakers and each of you. And I'd also like to thank the two members of Congress, Congressman Thompson and Congresswoman Schakowsky, who felt it was important enough to attend this briefing. Okay. So I'd also like to thank our partners and our sponsors. What?
And Congressman Luttrell, our co-chair.
Oh, who was unable to attend. Okay, I'm sorry. I would also like to thank our partners and sponsors, the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, the American Neurological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, Bristol Myers Squibb, Neurocrine Biosciences, One Mind, Otsuka, the STAR Coalition, Society for Neuroscience, and all for their continued commitment to advancing brain health and reducing stigma. And as I said, we're especially grateful to the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus, under whose auspices we're able to have these briefings. The American Brain Coalition encourages Congress to continue strong support for the NIMH and the other NIH institutes dedicated to brain research, as sustained federal investments critical to advancing science, informing evidence-based policy, and countering stigma at every level. We also encourage continued attention to mental health parity so that mental health conditions are treated as health conditions. And insurance companies finally come to the realization that this is just the right of every American. Thank you again for your leadership, your engagement, your commitment to improving brain health. And we look forward to continuing the conversation, and let's do it together. Thanks, everybody.